Lately, I've been really enjoying watching generic and mediocre rom-coms. Emphasis on mediocre. I don't want award-winning acting or storylines. I want the movie equivalent of the color beige. And I have a growing list of films to watch. All of them have like one special characteristic about them, some only being the actors, and I like comparing them to each other. Now, I found this film, Just Right, in the free category in YouTube's movie catalog. And its special characteristic, basketball. A sport that I've never played, watched, or I guess enjoyed, ever. We start off with a general overview of Queen Latifah's character, Leslie Wright's life. She's living in a house that she later describes as a fixer-upper. She drives a beat-up old Mustang from Jersey to New York City to her job as a physical therapist. Oh, and she's got a date tonight. One thing I really hate is when a character asks what Leslie's going to wear to her date, they both simultaneously say, black.
Black.
I know many people wear black because they're insecure about their body. And there's that fashion myth that black makes you look slimmer or whatever. But this all kind of just sets up that while Leslie is sweet and dedicated and pretty, she's not super attractive. Which I call bullshit because Queen Latifah is hot. When Leslie gets to her date, we get an interesting interaction between her and the valet. Basically to really nail down that her car is a piece of the door can't even open without body checking it. And then we meet her blind date, who's a decently attractive guy. We're treated to little snippets of their dinner and conversation, and honestly, it seems like everything is going really well. They're even talking about how many kids that they would want in the future. But remember what I said earlier? Leslie isn't the attractive marrying type. The guy tries to let her down easy by using some lines that she's clearly heard before.
My feelings are still kind of raw. I miss her.
You're not emotionally ready.
Which makes me really feel for her. Leslie makes her way home, where we're introduced to her best friend, Leech, and local gold digger, Morgan. Now, Morgan isn't subtle about her plans to marry for money and fame. Some of the first lines that we hear from this woman's mouth is about how she plans to snag herself an NBA player and become a trophy wife.
Now, and it dawned on me, a girl doesn't just become the wife of an NBA franchise player by accident.
And, coincidentally, they're both going to a game later that weekend, and Morgan just has to plan her outfit. The day of the game, we're introduced to Leslie's mom, who's one of my least favorite characters. Mom points out that Leslie's sensible choice of jeans and a jersey isn't going to get her a man. Then Morgan comes down wearing something incredibly inappropriate for a basketball game, and her mom practically swoons, saying, "This is what you wear to catch yourself a husband." Throughout this whole movie, Mom repeatedly pushes Leslie to dress or act a certain way to get a man. But then she also puts her daughter down if she thinks that the man she likes is too good for her. The best character in this film is Leslie's dad, and the only good parent. During the game, we see Leslie being an obnoxious fan, unfortunately sitting within a crowd of the opposing team's fans who's losing. At least she's paying attention to the game, because Morgan is just lusting over the clothes and accessories of the players' wives and girlfriends. And when the game is over, a couple of other gold diggers, aka Morgan's friends, come over and tell the Leech that they're headed out to see someone that might have an invite to Scott McKnight's birthday party. Oh yeah, the other half of this rom-com is NBA All-Star Scott McKnight, who is played by Common. Most important thing to note about him is that his contract with the Nets is going to end at the end of the season, but he wants to be re-signed. And he's really nice. This point is really thrusted at us when we and Leslie overhear a phone conversation between Scott and some charity official. props to Leslie because she's obviously a big fan and she actually keeps her cool with this big celebrity and even helps him out. Like, she's a little creepy at some points. Don't get me wrong. But I'm still going to give her credit. And in exchange for showing him how to open his gas tank of his new car, Scott gives Leslie an invite to his big birthday bash the next weekend. You know, the party that Leach wanted to go to. Oh, and he tries to open her car door for her and struggles because we really have to know that her car is up. Unfortunately for me, Leslie is a good friend and invites Morgan to be her +1 at this big party. While they're getting ready, Mom comes in and helps out with Leslie's makeup. And I kind of thought that this was a cute little bonding moment between the two of them. And then she ruins it. This is my least favorite scene in the entire film. So Mom shows both Leslie and Morgan this pair of diamond earrings that Leslie recognizes as her grandmother's earrings. Mom lets them know that these are lucky earrings. Her mother met her husband while wearing them, and then so did she. So you think she's going to give them to Leslie, right? Her daughter? Because they're a family heirloom? No! She gives them to Morgan! I hate her mom so goddamn much. And I hate her friend because she accepts them. It's not like Leslie pretended to not be upset. She's clearly not happy about it, and they both just ignore it. But her dad's cool and knows his daughter's worth, so at least she has one good parent. At the party, Morgan quickly ditches Leslie to go schmooze or whatever, and Leslie takes advantage of free booze because who wouldn't, and ends up talking with Scott. And just as they seem to be hitting it off because they're clearly compatible, the Leech shows up nonchalantly and gets introduced. I'll give it to Morgan though. She's pretty smart. She remembered that Leslie said something about him being big into his various charities. So she pretends to get a phone call from a shelter she volunteers at, and then leaves Scott without her number. Morgan lets Leslie know she's probably the first woman to not give her number to him, thus creating this mysterious aura around her that men find irresistible. And it works! Scott finds out where Leslie lives, which is borderline creepy, to see Morgan because he knows that they live together. Leslie quickly becomes the third wheel in her own house, and boom, Scott and Morgan are together. We're treated to a montage of their 3-month relationship in which Morgan moves in with Scott, gets a bunch of expensive gifts, and a ton of publicity. Her dream come true. Leslie gets invited to yet another party that Scott's throwing, and I can't even remember what this one is for. Morgan shows off the house, and Leslie straight up asks her if she's just using him. Morgan denies it, says maybe at first, but she's fell in love and is completely for real. I doubt it, Leslie doubts it, and even Scott's mom doubts it. But it all doesn't matter because Scott proposes. The dream is short-lived though, because Scott gets hurt, and it looks like it could be possibly career-ending. Now, what do you think known gold digger and Leech Morgan will do? Well, of course, she supports her fiancé. And by support, I mean fires the best physical therapist money can buy because she's hot.
Some women have gaydar. I've got hodar.
Oh, and of course, she instead hires Leslie because Leslie isn't a threat. How could she be? Big twist ahead. Hold on to your seats. Morgan ends up leaving Scott when there's a rumor that his career is over, thus throwing Scott in a deep depression. Cue depression montage. It's very relatable, honestly. Even his mother, who he's very close with, can't get him out of this funk. Enter Leslie. Since Scott isn't taking his physical therapy seriously anymore, Leslie decides it's time for a wake-up call. So he gets the ice bucket. Twice. Leslie and Scott start to bond over his recovery and their common interests, because obviously they have a lot in common because they're compatible. Scott's mom even starts to like her. And at this point, it's clear that Leslie and Scott have a much more healthy relationship, Even more so when Leslie catches a bad cold and Scott takes it upon himself to take care of her. It's a very sweet and wholesome moment. As time goes on, each of them open up to one another. Leslie lets Scott in on why she refuses to fix or replace her car. It's an heirloom from her granddad, and the dent in the door reminds her of his dimple. Scott lets her in on his big secret room. It's not that exciting. It's a music room. No sex dungeon this time. He also admits that he's afraid to go back to playing because what if he's not good enough anymore? She tells him that's bull. And of course, they almost kiss. And of course, they cock-block themselves. The next day or so, at the game, Scott is visibly worse. Everyone notices it. He notices it and is kind of down about it until Leslie tells him the obvious, and suddenly he has the motivation to just go for it. And he goes for it. In the excitement of winning, Scott asks Leslie out on a date. She dresses in a bomb-ass dress, and he's practically swooning. He takes her to this jazz bar because they have the same taste in music. Oh, and he also fixed her car without taking out the coveted dent. And they finally kiss! Took them forever. They actually go a little bit further than kissing, back at his house. In the morning, Leslie is a giggly mess when she wakes up to breakfast in bed while Scott goes for a run. The domestic bliss does not last, though, because once Scott returns from his run, Morgan the leech drops by because she saw him not suck at the game and wants him to take her back. Leslie overhears, and predictably, Scott doesn't say no while she's listening. The relationship is basically over. Leslie moves back to her original job, and Scott decides to give Morgan another go. It's aggravating. Much to her surprise, Leslie starts to be scouted by a bunch of NBA teams to be their trainer/physical therapist, including Scott's team. She's reluctant to accept their offer, though, because there's still some awkward, unresolved tension between the pair. Leslie instead accepts an in-person interview and tour at another team's facility. Mom, predictably, isn't supportive about this because accepting this job would mean Leslie would have to move or whatever. She then goes on to say that Leslie shouldn't have gotten her hopes up with Scott because she's not the type to score a man like that. Man of the Year, Leslie's dad, finally lays into his wife, accusing her of not seeing how wonderful Leslie really is. But then Leslie tells him to just let it go and goes to her interview. And I hate that because her mom was finally going to get a talking to, and Leslie just let it go? What? Maybe I'm just like a vengeful little, or maybe like I'm always just angry. I don't get it. Like, this movie, if you couldn't tell from my voice, makes me so agitated. Anyway, elsewhere, Scott is trying to give Morgan another chance by taking her on a first date. He wants to start over, take it slow this time. And Leach doesn't seem to get that as she rambles on about how they can still get married later that year. Scott grows a backbone and lets her know that that's very presumptuous of her, and she has the nerve to act mad about it. Like, bitch, you left him! No, whatever. During a TV interview, Scott goes on and on about how his comeback has everything to do with his physical therapist, Leslie, and that she's so special.
How in the world did you do it?
2 words. Leslie Wright.
Coincidentally, Morgan and Leslie's mom, who's watching at home, both realize that Scott is in love with Leslie. As he runs off stage, realizing this himself, Morgan tells him where he can find Leslie, and off he goes. Following an interview, Scott surprises Leslie as she's about to leave and confesses his love for her. She interrupts his speech to make a quick phone call. Iconic. Scott's a little put off, obviously, until he finds out that the phone call is to the Nets, in which Leslie accepts their offer.
Great. Well, you have a new Nets trainer.
And they kiss. Fast forward 1 year, and Leslie is still hanging out with Leach Morgan, but she's also working for the Nets and gets to watch her husband, Scott, play all the time. And end. Now, this movie is as basic gets. It's very predictable, and if I'm being completely honest, watching the trailer is basically watching the movie. I'd give it like a 4.5 out of 10, which is just about on par with the critics' score from Rotten Tomatoes. I think it could have squeaked by with like a 6 out of 10, but I had some complaints that I cannot let go. First, besides not being the least bit original, the constant harking on Queen Latifah's character not being the conventional love interest is annoying. The main reason I hate Mama Wright is because of her constant nagging of Leslie and putting her down. Nobody says it outright, but we can infer that she's not marriage material because she isn't a size 2 like Morgan. I'm not body shaming Morgan. Paula Patton is also a beautiful woman, but her size shouldn't make her any better or more beautiful than someone else, even in a fictional story. Second, the chemistry is weird between the leads, Leslie and Scott. Now, don't attack me for this, but I think it might be Common's acting. It's not great. It could have been how it's written, but I don't know. Queen Latifah and Paula seemed to be doing well enough with what they were given. There was an overall lot of telling, not showing, which isn't usually a good thing. I most definitely could go on. However, my gripes with this movie will just get more and more nitpicky as I continue. The good things. Throughout this movie, there's this gag that Mr. Wright, while he means well, is the worst handyman, but continues to try and help Leslie with renovating her house. I think it's cute. There's a scene towards the end of the film where Leslie is being given a tour of this training facility, but we can clearly see that they only start walking once the camera pans in front of them, even though they were supposedly already walking around the facility. Not walking, walking. Top notch, really. And because the story was centered around the NBA, we get a decent bit of cameos from real basketball players and others in the industry. And the acting is weird and awkward, and it makes Common's performance look Oscar-worthy. Don't hurt me. Speaking of Common, he's 6 foot supposedly, but next to these NBA players, he looks freaking tiny, and I really enjoyed that. I think I'm done now. Like, if there's anything else, I'll just keep it to myself. I hope y'all enjoyed. Any comments, questions, concerns, you know where to leave them. But please, be kind to me. I'm sensitive. Peace.